how would you define a comfort zone in your own words?
Okay. Well, to me, your comfort zone is that your routines, your way of being, which distracts you from your discomfort, from your fundamental discomfort. So it's that which keeps a lid on your unhappiness as well.
Right. So it helps distract you and shelters you from dissatisfaction. But what dissatisfaction? Of what? With what?
Exactly. So not necessarily pain of things not going the way you want them to go.
So dissatisfaction of not being in control, fundamentally. The reason why I'm trying to clarify this is because it's not. It's a subtle. It goes on a very subtle level. It's not just a dissatisfaction on like a kind that people can easily relate to. It's something you will need to dig in, and do lots of your cover-ups, and then discover that you depend on comfort and comfort zone, because basically it provides you, it helps you entertain the notion that you are in control, that you do have a say, that you are your own, and that basically you will be. So it's a sense of that existential safety that comes from it.
Right. So you are you're dissatisfied because you're not in control. Fundamentally, you.
Well, exactly. So you're dissatisfied because you're recognizing that even your control is not up to you. It's not within your say, fundamentally. Even things you can control, it's only relatively so. And a relative control, it's not really the control that you need for the level to reach the level of safety. You need the absolute control, at least implicitly. Yeah. You need to be your own. Like that's what and always that sense of like not seeing anicca results in possessions, as the Buddha would say. It results in acquisitions. Not because you acquired things physically necessarily, but because internally you refuse to admit and acknowledge and discern the inherent anicca of these things, that they are not controllable, thus not ownable. So even if you renounce all the worldly possessions, but internally you refuse to face the anicca that fills you with anxiety, you are taking all of the possessions of the world. And that's why you still have the self-view.
That's your only way of dealing with it. And
you don't know how to deal with that frightening recognition that you are not your own.
Yeah. So what do? I'll make things my own.
Well, exactly. Or at least I'll find things that will enable me to pretend that things are my own, and then just wishfully hope that things will not go against the way I wanted them to go, because if they do, I will not be able to deal with it, and I will be overwhelmed by suffering and suffer and so on. That's why people try to outrun anxiety and the whole thing. So that's what I mean, the comfort zone, and some people need more of have a bigger comfort zone. Some people have a lesser comfort zone, so to speak.
Or dependency.
That's what I mean. The size of the comfort zone determines your dependency on the comfort zone.
Right.
But either way, if you start looking at it, it can be a good symptom to see how much of a comfort zone you need for yourself. It can be a good kind of indicator of how much of a cover-up you're engaging with on that existential level. And even in mundane worldly terms, people who are afraid to even think about the extent of the comfort zone and just want to commit to it and not question it and not have the slightest doubt about it are usually people that don't get anywhere in their life. Because even just a worldly ambition requires taking some risk, requires recognizing a certain degree of non-control. So you take the risk. Things can go either way. And because of that, you kind of better yourself. So even in worldly terms, stepping outside of the comfort zone is actually beneficial.
But as soon as you step out of that comfort zone, for many people, there's anxiety of what might happen.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you force then your mind to grow. If there is no stress, there will be no response of growth. Same, physically, mentally. If there is no tightening of the pressure in that sense, there is no reason for body and mind to adapt to the new pressuring environment. So it won't grow.
Yeah,
it won't become
grows,
stronger.
But then another person doubles down on not...
Doubles down on sheltering itself from any. Which results then in doubling down on the weakness, increasing the weakness. Indirectly, but that's the outcome of it. So the more you refuse to accept these things on a mental level, that you're not in control, that anxiety is a natural, basically, part of the existence, the weaker, the more sensitive to it you will become. And the more you try to get rid of it, the more power you give it. So then, how far would you then want to go in terms of... So, speaking from the point of view of the practice, say, how far would you want to go in terms of questioning or sort of disturbing your own comfort zone? Because would you just like go and risk your life? Because fundamentally, being alive is a form of a comfort zone. What criteria would you use as to how far to go? Give everything up, quit your job, everything, and go and live on the street? Because I don't want to depend on the comfort zone. So how far should a person go?
So why are they going? Why are they stepping?
Because they want to practice.
Okay, so you're stepping out is...
So how far they need to step out? So like if somebody, say a layperson, wants to practice, maybe even for arahantship, do they just get up, walk out, not say a word to anyone, leave everything behind and just go and live under a bridge or somewhere?
Yeah.
How far do they have to go?
They would have to give up things which are unwholesome, obviously. But
sure, but not eating in the afternoon and being a celibate requires you to give up things that are unwholesome. But like walking out and living under a bridge also requires you to not eat in the afternoon because you won't have any food to eat. So either way you'll be giving up unwholesome, but there are obviously two different ways of going about it. So what criteria could a person use then to know how far is like too far?
Outside of my comfort zone.
Testing my comfort zone, uprooting my comfort zone, and how far is just now being ridiculous and risky? Well, it would be. It's actually a common. You could use a common sense thing, as the Buddha did in the suttas, and I think it's in the Sabhasava Sutta as well. Certain things to be abandoned by avoiding. So you recognize that. First, you kind of recognize the extent of your comfort zone. And I don't mean the comfort zone is not always simply defined by comfort, physical comfort. More often than not, it's the mental comfort and need and habit and access to things. That's where people kind of are resting on. So you want to question that. So the most immediate way of questioning and disturbing your comfort zone is sense restraint. That will already going to fill plenty of people with anxiety and panic. Just saying no to their desires. And you realize most people wouldn't even need more than that, in a way. Then if afterwards that they get used to that sense restraint, celibacy, and then they feel like they're stalling and not really making any significant progress, then they could, start digging things a bit further. As the Buddha said, delve with a knife. Just keep cutting in until there's no more work for you to be done. At the same time, you use the common sense. So you are not enlightened, you are not free from suffering, you don't know the escape. So yes, you need to uproot your comfort zone and your dependence upon it, but you don't want to do it to the extent whereby you will factually be risking your life, because you might die unenlightened and not knowing anything. So that's because there were those practices even back in the day, and I'm sure some people would still have those views today of like, oh, I'll just say yes to everything, or I say no to everything, or I just walk straight. That was like in the suttas. And it doesn't matter what, you don't go left, you don't go right, you just keep walking straight. So if there is a cliff, you'll just walk through, because that's the strength of your determination. That's how much you will not depend on any comfort or reason for that matter. But the Buddha would say, no, certain things are to be abandoned by wisely avoiding them. Wisely you avoid a raging elephant that's about to stomp you, a rabid dog, a group of bandits that might kill you. Why? Because if they do, you will lose your life without having achieved the liberation and so on. After you achieve liberation, if you choose to stand in front of an elephant, that's fine, because you have nothing to lose anymore. Then you might not worry about it. So you don't want to lose perspective on your goal, which is to be free from suffering, enlightened, free from samsara, and so on. So if you want to question your comfort zone, you question it in those manners. So how can I test or challenge my comfort zone without risking my life or compromising my health significantly? That would occupy all my time, and I wouldn't be able to practice and so on. And then you would even, like as I said, it would be obvious. There's nothing harmful, and there's nothing stopping you in practicing sense restraint, even within your current comfort zone. So you don't need to, I must go and live on the street and so on. No, I just need to be celibate. And there you go. Your entire world of comfort is uprooted by that determination and decision. And you would feel it, even without necessarily having to change the circumstances significantly. Now, sure, if the circumstances are too testing, too challenging for you to practice sense restraint, then yeah, you want to find somewhere else where you can. But all from the so the reference point should be the practice, the liberation, and the achieving the goal. Not like some sort of ideal of I must live on the street independent of others and never eat for the rest of my life. No, there's just another thing now that you're trying to replace your comfort zone with.
Asceticism.
Exactly, asceticism, this extreme form
comforting.
where you just shun all the comfort. It's like, but then you become dependent on that.
Yeah. So you want to get rid of that dependency on something.
Exactly, but not replace it. Because that's the case when you know in the when the Buddha said the ascetic practices are ignoble and don't result in liberation. It's because you don't really uproot any dependency. You just shun all the comfort and everything, and that becomes your thing you depend on. Constant saying no. And either way, you haven't really uprooted that existential dependence, which requires you to understand this thing. In which case, if you do, you might not need to change things too significantly if they were already conducive for wholesomeness. So that's what I mean. Like, it's not that you must give everything and live under the root of a tree. I mean, if you see that directly conducive towards wholesome mental states, then do it. And that's when the Buddha would say, let those who want to do that, do that. The ascetic practices. As in, meaning let those who know that these ascetic practices will bring wholesome things to increase, unwholesome things to decrease, let them do it. But that's not always the case. For some people, shunning too much comfort too soon will actually bring the unwholesome to increase and wholesome to decrease. Because the reference point should be the practice and liberation and freedom from suffering, not necessarily a sense of duty and what you kind of romantically assumed you must be living with and giving up.
But so to be free from suffering, to be free from that dissatisfaction,
to be free from that, basically from the dissatisfaction that arises on account of fundamental existential non-control. So that's your goal, that's your criteria. You don't want to be dependent, and that's like, you don't want to be depending on anything. It's when that's the Buddha would say, you don't find anything as a support. Your consciousness is not supported by anything, any other aggregate, and so on. And the simile was that the cow, the flayed cow with the wounds, that if it leans on the wall, it's being eaten by the creatures that live on the wall. If it lays on the ground, it's being eaten by the creatures that live. If it stands up, it's being eaten by the creatures that are flying in the air. Either way, if it tries to use anything as a support, it's being devoured. And that's it. If you try to use anything as your comfort zone, on account of which you don't face the reality that you are a wounded animal subjected to death, not in your control, and so on, you will suffer. Not because of the wounds, but because you're trying to cover it up. So the dissatisfaction comes because you don't want to acknowledge and admit that you're not in control because it's too frightening.
So as you said before, like, pain is not the problem.
Pain is not a problem.
But it's that resistance towards it which makes it painful.
That's what the dukkha is. Yeah. Physical discomfort is not the dukkha that you should be sort of freeing yourself from, because the body is not in your control. You can't free yourself from it. That's why even arahants would say, any disturbance that's left now, after I become an arahant, any disturbance that's left, it's on account of this body until it breaks apart. So any annoyance, it's just physical. None of that will cause mental anguish or suffering.
So you want to be doing things gradually but in terms of the practice, you want to be revealing the nature of things.
Well, exactly. You don't want to just go through the motions of giving things up and questioning and challenging my comfort zone. You want to have the context. Context being, I am existentially depending upon a sense of control. And that's basically, my comfort zone is the symptom of that. So I don't want to be existentially depending. As we would say, I don't want to be using anything as a support internally. So
I just want everything that I use to remind me of the nature of things.
Well, yeah, that's like if you gain perspective, sure.
You want to do things that keep that
can
context
sustain
alive.
That context alive. Yeah. So it's there are obvious things that you will have to stop doing, things that will be completely and unequivocally always distracting you from that context. Sensuality, carelessness, breaking the precepts, taking drugs, alcohol, and so on.
Well, decoration, that's what it says, asavas to be abandoned by using the four requisites properly, just for covering up the shameful parts.
Yes,
of
by
the body.
rewriting the purpose of things you use them for. Not for beautification or decoration, but for the practical, basically, sustenance and need until you have fulfilled your goal. So that's another thing.
Right.
So you would know exactly what it's conducive and what it's not conducive, the clearer your goal is. So most people practice the Dhamma, have a vague notion of some goal, but they can't relate to it internally. They don't see a direct line between if I do this will result in that, and it's all kind of over there and wishful thinking and hoping that it will result like the way they want it to result. But are you clear as to what needs to be done in terms of the Dhamma practice? Like as the Buddha would say, do you hear, you measure the task, and then the inspiration comes because now you know exactly how much you need to do. So internally, your goal should be to not depend on anything. No, any feeling or any perception or any circumstance, basically anything that provides you with comfort and that sense of sort of like resting upon something, like, I'm safe here. You are not in any position of safety. So that should be the context you should only be increasing in your practice, the recognition of that context. Because that's the true way to find the safety then.
Because I step outside of my comfort zone in the right way.
And that might make you tougher, might make you grow a bit. Yeah. But if you do it just for the sake of doing it, you are not going to get any substantial wisdom. I mean, you can do it with the intention to try and learn from it and so on. But even then you use the common sense. So let me not do to the extent that I cannot sustain. Like I can go and live under a bridge without anything or anyone for a bit before I get sick and basically die or something. Or I can go and live in this tiger-infested jungle. But there's a good chance, I might die within a month because there are man-eaters there and so on. So, that's foolish then. Because there are plenty of other non-life-threatening ways that you can challenge and uproot your comfort zone. Be celibate. Don't eat in the afternoon. Restrain your eyes, nose, ears. Don't go after the pleasure of sense objects. That will shake you right to the core, because the core of the human existence is that sensual being of sensuality, being that depends upon the pleasures obtained through the object of the senses. And the Buddha said that Puthujjana doesn't know any other escape from the discomfort, from the unpleasant feeling, except sensuality. That's why he's like a double, sort of twice bound by it. First because he wants pleasure, but also because that's his only way of avoiding pain and discomfort.
It's the distraction. So the only way to deal with things, to deal with the nature,
is to turn a blind eye to it.
To distract yourself.
Yeah. Find things to do.
Removing distractions. Obviously, you will reveal the nature.
Oh yeah, exactly. Gradually, if you refuse to engage with distractions, first you're going to have just a good old plain day-to-day boredom. But if you still don't give in and try to distract yourself, that boredom, you're going to start feeling the weight of it, and then you realize, oh, this is something much more.
Because so you start feeling the weight of it, meaning more anxiety. The anxiety that comes from seeing the nature of you not being in control, nature.
Yeah.
But if you stick with that long enough and don't try to run away from that nature, which is...
Well, you will force your mind to grow. Because that's how you grow. That's how you become stronger, by stressing it. So yeah, sure, you could stress it too much and then just have a breakdown because you can't bear that anxiety.
No.
But if you're sense restrained beforehand, if you kept the precepts beforehand, if you don't have the negative, unwholesome outlets of your behavior, like bad habits and so on, you are actually compressing it and you're forcing it to adapt.
Yeah.
So once you become more and more used to anxiety and not trying to outrun it, then you realize that the only reason it was unpleasant is because you kept trying to outrun it.
Yeah.
Not because in itself. Sense of the non-control that people can recognize in anicca, it's quite neutral. There's nothing wrong or unpleasant in it. Like, you don't suffer on account of you have no control over the tree or the river. And that doesn't bother you. Why not? Because it's still the phenomenon of non-control that you recognize. It doesn't bother you because you're not personally invested in controlling it. So then you realize that when any sense of non-control bothers you, it's only that bother is actually caused by your investment of, I want to control this, or I assume to control this. So now the recognition of non-control is undermining that. But if you remove your assumption, no amount of non-control can cause you suffering. It's just as it is. The way things are in that sense, like things are truly anicca, but you see it or not. The only reason anicca will be dukkha is if you ignore the fact that they are anicca. So it's because of your ignorance that anicca is dukkha, not because in itself anicca is dukkha.
So you won't at any stage change that fact of anicca.
Inconceivable.
Well, I'll practice in such a way that anicca changes. No, stop going against that.
You stop entertaining assumptions that are diametrically opposed to anicca, to the nature that you recognize. So anxiety is a good symptom, basically. If you're bothered by anxiety, it's not because anxiety bothers you, it's because of your views that are opposed to that which anxiety is revealing, which is non-control. So stop entertaining control, stop entertaining the control of through your possessions, of your possessions, stop entertaining ownership. Because all you need to do is start thinking about it, and even things that you do own, just think about it. Can you prevent them from disappearing or something happening to them? Inconceivable. Maintain that context and you are eroding the ownership. The longer you're maintaining, the less and less ownership there will be remaining. That's not to say that it's going to be pleasant or inspiring. Quite the opposite.
But once that ownership is gone, so to speak, then that
dispassion.
There's still anicca, but that anxiety there changes.
Well, because you're not trying to outrun it, you're not trying to get rid of it, which means it's not going to be unpleasant. It's going to be just a neutral state of things. So you wouldn't really call it anxiety anymore from that point of view.
Yes, and you said in the past that you might have called it being alert.
Alertness, recognition that things might end next second.
Because they might.
The mindfulness of death that the Buddha encouraged. That's exactly that. First, you'll be anxious because the assumption of life is so strong. But if you have uprooted the assumption of life, then it's just recognition that I literally might die within the next in and out breath. And it's just you're alert to that fundamental, very profound recognition.
So somehow, from anxiety, when you understand things, when you have get right view, that anxiety changes into alert mindfulness.
It doesn't change. It always was that.
Right.
That's the thing. Anxiety is already alertness that you're resisting, which is why that alertness is unpleasant. That's why mindfulness, responsibility, recognition of your situation are all kind of unpleasant recognition for Puthujjana. So, and that's why Puthujjana cannot become a Sotapanna by chance, by miracle, or by technique. Because the direction of Sotapatti, the right view and freedom, is through the anxiety that entire being of Puthujjana is geared against. Always. Exactly. By default, ownership, sense of self, self-view, all of that is against that which is behind the anxiety. And that's why anxiety is so terrifying and unpleasant. So even when people practice to be free from anxiety, that practice will not result in liberation, because it's taking you away from that which is inherently revealed by anxiety that you cannot bear. So the practice should not be freeing you from anxiety. It should be making you less disturbed by anxiety. You get, like, saying being free from anxiety means being free from existence while you still exist. It's a contradiction in terms. It's impossible. Anxiety is the existence, or the existence is behind the anxiety, whichever you want to call it.
But when it's a problem,
so if it's a problem, it's not because of existence or the anxiety. It's because of your assumptions in regard to it. So the practice should be enabling you to accept that and endure it, and then eventually not even being bothered by it, and then see exactly what's there. And that's the direction of Sotapanna. That's what I said before, like when the suttas say, or at the moment of death they will achieve the fruit, these various noble disciples. Not because there's some mystical things happen in the moment of death, it's because death is at the end of that direction that you don't want to look at when you experience anxiety in day-to-day life. But you will have to go through it eventually. So the one with the right view goes that way even before he dies. And then Arahant has fully walked that way and freed himself. That's why death does not apply to him anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's why the Sotapanna can
become an Arahant at the moment of death. Yeah.
Because
that's the direction where his Sotapanna already is.
Yeah. He's facing that nature.
Yeah, of course.
With no distractions. That's the danger for any distractions for the Sotapanna. That's why he doesn't make any progress.
It's the distractions, they just keep him basically slowing him down from heading the way that he's heading.
Yeah.
So that's why also all a noble disciple needs to do is not be negligent and make the effort towards distractions. Because if he doesn't make the effort towards distraction, what he's left with is his right view, which means he's left with the practice. So all he needs to do is abstain from unwholesome things and he'll become an Arahant. He doesn't need to do anything on top of that.